This is NEAF Talks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the hardest working MC in the cosmos, Vincent Coulihan.
So our keynote speaker today he's a retired NASA astronaut. He's a retired naval aviator captain. He's flown on F-4, F-14s, and F-18 aircraft. He's flown off of 5 aircraft carriers. He's also an avid racer in the Reno Air Show. But most importantly, he is a really good person, and he has a lot to offer us today in his talk. He has flown on 5 Space Shuttle missions, and to share his story with you today, I'd like a big warm welcome to Robert Hoot Gibson, retired captain, retired astronaut.
Great. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. This is my first time attending the Northeast Astro Forum. So thank you for inviting me. I got asked just a few days ago, a week ago, what's the title of your presentation? I said, well, I don't know. Usually it's just a presentation. So I got to thinking and I said, okay, well, maybe I'll call it Piper Cubs to Mach 25. And so I'm going to show, they didn't tell me what to talk about, so I got to pick whatever I felt like talking about. So brace yourselves. Here comes. Well, I got to do this. I got to fly space shuttles, and this was a photo we took on my last mission over the Black Sea. To the right side of the picture is Europe, and to the left side of the picture is Asia. And the Crimean Peninsula, which has been in the news very much lately, is on the right side in that picture. Well, how did I get there? Well, Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad were both pilots, which is how they met. And this was a little unusual. My mother, in the year 1943, and 2 of her girlfriends from college decided they were going to learn how to fly. And if you're going to learn how to fly, you got to have an airplane. So the 3 of them went out and bought this airplane, which is a J-2 Taylor Cub. So this is not Dad's airplane. This is Mom's airplane that's in the picture. And that's how she met my dad. So I've grown up with flying, and I have lots of pictures like this one of my biggie brother and I playing on the airport at Cooperstown, New York, which is where I was born. And I have, like I say, I have lots of photos similar to this one. And my earliest recollection of flying with my dad was in a Piper Cub when I was 5 years old. And my dad was letting me fly the airplane, and then when we got close to landing, he said, okay, let me fly it now. And I was bummed because I still wanted to fly it some more. So right in the final flare, about to touch down, I got on the controls and started moving the control stick. I got a big chewing out from both Mom and Dad. When somebody else is flying, you don't touch the controls. So that's the Piper Cub part. Okay, so we're going to do Piper Cubs to Mach 25. You probably all know that when an airplane goes supersonic, it creates a shock wave. So this is an F-18 creating a shock wave at about Mach 1.5, 1.5 times the speed of sound. And here's what a space shuttle did for a shock wave. This is a wind tunnel model of a space shuttle at Mach 25, 25 times the speed of sound, which is how fast we're going when we hit Earth's atmosphere coming back into land. And we heat that outside air up to 6,000 degrees in the shock wave that wraps around us. So that's a Mach 25 shock wave. Here's a Cessna shock wave. Somebody sent me this picture, and it's kind of a cute picture of a Cessna 150 going supersonic, which I don't think has actually happened. Well, my dad was my hero, and he was my inspiration. He was an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot, and I knew from the time I was about 10 years old, I want to be my dad. I want to be an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot. So I graduated in aeronautical engineering, joined the Navy, went through pilot training, and I must have done very well because I was awarded my very first choice for airplanes that I wanted to fly, and that's F-4 Phantoms out of Miramar in San Diego. And so that was what I flew first, and my first combat cruise was in the F-4 Phantom. And flying from an aircraft carrier is really exciting, because you go from this position to this position in about 4.5 seconds. And when you get to this position, you're 175 miles an hour. There's not a Corvette on Earth that'll touch it. So it really is exciting flying from an aircraft carrier. I must have done well in my squadron because they selected me to go to the Naval Fighter Weapons School, more commonly known as Top Gun. And that was like a graduate course in fighter tactics, air-to-air missiles, radar systems. And it was really exciting. It's a month-long course. My first dogfight in Top Gun was against the Navy's MiG ace, who had just shot down his 5th MiG in Vietnam. And I just knew he was gonna beat me up really bad. And I couldn't believe it. I fought him to a draw. And to me, that was a huge victory. But while I was there at Top Gun, I have to tell you, there wasn't anybody that looked anything like Kelly McGillis. Which is only fair, because none of us were as good looking as Tom Cruise either. So speaking of Tom Cruise, this is the airplane that Tom Cruise was flying in the original Top Gun movie, the F-14 Tomcat. This is my Tomcat. After flying the F-4 Phantom, I was in the Navy's first F-14 Tomcat squadron, and this is my airplane. You can just kind of barely see it says Lieutenant Bob Gibson up there on the front cockpit. They wouldn't let me put Hoot. They wouldn't let me put Lieutenant Hoot Gibson. And I said, why not? Because I've gone by Hoot for several years before I went into the F-14s. And they said, no nicknames. I said, well, what's Bob? Isn't Bob a nickname for... They said, it doesn't matter. You're not putting Hoot on the airplane, so just forget about it. So I had Lieutenant Bob Gibson on my airplane. The Tomcat was such a big advance in fighters, jet fighters, over the F-4 Phantom even. And at the time, the F-4 Phantom had been the world's best all-around fighter. But it had, oh golly, much more sophisticated radar and weapon system. It had a swing wing, which in this picture, the wing is swept all the way forward, and we could hydraulically sweep the wings aft, like in this picture, and it made it a more efficient supersonic airplane. And both the F-4 Phantom and the Tomcat could do 2.4 times the speed of sound, Mach 2.4. And the F-14 Tomcat with the wings swept aft like this really looked cool. I used to joke and say it didn't do anything, but it made the airplane sure look cool. But no, it actually did. It helped us supersonically. Well, after attending the Navy's test pilot school, I got to fly this Russian MiG-21. And what a hot rod this thing is. It is one of the original lightweight fighters. Half of the fuselage, half of the body of that airplane is engine. So it really had a lot of power, a lot of thrust. Really an exciting airplane. I flew it in air shows for about 6 or 7 years. And it was really a lot of fun to fly. Well, and then I got to fly this. This was pretty exciting too. And you know, when you'd see pictures, I don't know if any of you have actually been there for a shuttle launch, which it's been a while now since we've launched any shuttles. But you watched it lift off. It looked so slow and majestic when it lifted off. That's because it's so big. It wasn't slow and majestic. By the time our tail would get to the top of this tower, we're over 100 miles an hour. So once again, there's not a Corvette on Earth that'll touch it. We would go from standing still on the launch pad to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. That's better than 2,000 miles an hour per minute. So really an exciting ride. On my first mission, this was my first mission, it was aboard the Challenger. We launched 2 commercial communication satellites, but the thing we will really be remembered for was this: the world's first untethered spacewalk. And this is a picture of Bruce McCandless. He's flying a rocket backpack. He's going to use it to fly pretty far away from the shuttle. And I get asked all the time, Hoot, did you ever get to go outside and do a spacewalk? And I say, no. As a pilot astronaut, I am far too valuable to risk me outside. We've got lots of mission specialists. We could send them all out there, and if none of them come back, who cares? You know? Okay. I'm kidding. We would care a lot. But this I watched happening, and I said, oh man, I would love to do that, but I would much rather be a pilot astronaut because I got to be a mission commander 4 times. So they used the rocket pack to fly pretty far away. And you'll notice he's not tethered. Now, we had a procedure that we worked out in the simulator. If he would run out of propellant, or if he had an electrical malfunction in his rocket pack and he couldn't maneuver back, we could fly Challenger over to him to pick him up if he offers us enough money. And of course, nothing like that ever happened. We had developed a crew rescue procedure in the simulator. We didn't get to use it on a spacewalking astronaut because that system just worked beautifully. But at one point, one of those clumsy boys who was out in the cargo bay kicked loose a foot platform, and it was floating away. It was just an aluminum platform. It probably cost $250,000. So the commander, Vance Brand, said, we're going to go rescue it. We're going to go get it. So we powered up the procedure, turned on the big thrusters, maneuvered over, brought the thing into the cargo bay. Bruce McCandles reached out and grabbed it. So we got to rescue a foot platform. So the procedure worked. Well, I was up for 8 days on that mission. We came back and made the very first landing back at Cape Canaveral. If you've ever seen the IMAX movie, The Dream is Alive, that starts off with my first landing. And I was the co-pilot, so I was making all the intercom calls about 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet, airspeeds, things like that. So that's in the very beginning of the IMAX movie, The Dream is Alive. Well, not even 2 years later, I'm going back to space again, this time as the mission commander. We had a really interesting person on the crew. Well, they were all really interesting, really. But we had one of the members of this crew who looks like a politician, has sort of a politician-looking smile. Right away, we can identify United States Congressman Bill Nelson. And he got to go to space with us because he was the chairman of the House Subcommittee on Space. So NASA invited Senator Jake Garn, the chairman of the Senate Subcommittee, and Bill Nelson, chairman of the House Subcommittee, to go to space so that they could be more informed about what happens. Well, we had a lot of trouble getting to space. We climbed into the Space Shuttle Columbia 5 times before we finally launched. We were snake bit from the very beginning. We had anomalies, we had weather, we had all kinds of things go wrong. It was such a relief when finally on January the 12th, 1986, we actually got to lift off. So we tried, like I say, we tried 5 times before we got to go. And in this picture, it looks like we're going down, doesn't it? We are not going down at any point in the launch. We have gained enough altitude now to get above the thick part of Earth's atmosphere, and now we're following the curvature of the Earth, accelerating to that speed of 17,500 miles an hour, which is how fast we need to be in an orbit around the Earth. Well, we launched a communications satellite, and here's all the astronomy I was going to talk to us about. I know we're the Astro Forum, but here's all the astronomy I know. My navigation star was Bellatrix in Orion the Hunter. And so even I can find Bellatrix. And I had to do a calibration of an optical alignment site that we had on board Columbia. And the mission control guys knew that I wasn't the sharpest on the constellations, but they said, okay, Hoot, we're going to give you Bellatrix for your navigation star. So I was able to do it using Bellatrix. Well, we had a hard time getting to space. We had a hard time getting back. We tried to come home on the 4th day of the mission, and the weather was no good at Cape Canaveral. We tried again on the 5th day of the mission. The weather was still no good. They waved us off another whole day, and we tried again on the 6th day, and the weather at Cape Canaveral was still socked in. And they said, guys, take it one more orbit around the Earth, and bring it down into Edwards Air Force Base in California. So my first landing as mission commander was an unplanned night landing. And it was only the second time that we had done a night landing. And actually, I could see that this might happen. If we didn't land at Cape Canaveral, which would happen right at sunrise, no matter which day it was, if we didn't come into Cape Canaveral, any other landing opportunity we had was going to be a night landing. So my co-pilot and I did most all of our landing training at night, because you can certainly land it in the daytime if you can land it at night. So, you know, I make it sound really challenging and really difficult. We were much more prepared for it than what I've described. Well, that was January the 18th, 1986. 10 days later, we all watched the Challenger destroyed during launch. And the 7 astronauts were all friends of mine, and people asked me, what was that like? Well, we had just had a huge 1985. We had launched 8 missions in 1985. We had our 4th Space Shuttle online. The Atlantis joined the fleet. And then all of a sudden, we had killed our 7 friends, and we had shut the space program down for nearly 3 years. I worked on the investigation of the accident down at Cape Canaveral, focusing primarily on the solid rocket boosters, which you probably all know that was the cause of the accident. And since I learned so much about the solid rocket boosters, I was appointed to be the lead astronaut to the redesign team. It took us nearly 3 years to figure out what happened, why it happened, how to redesign the vehicle, how to rebuild it, and then how to certify it for flight all over again. So it took nearly 3 years, and since I had worked on those booster rockets, the chief astronaut said, okay, if you think it's really ready to launch, you go fly it. So I got assigned to be the commander of the 2nd mission when we started up again. So I commanded the 24th launch. We lost Challenger on the 25th launch, and then I commanded the 27th launch, and it was an all-military crew because it was a top-secret Department of Defense mission. And if I tell you what it was, we can't ever leave this auditorium. So all I can tell you is that we launched a major new intelligence satellite. We separated away from it, and there was a problem with it, and we had to do an unplanned re-rendezvous with it, and in conjunction with mission control, fix it, and then separate it away, and it went on to a completely successful career. That's as much as I'm allowed to tell about it to this day. Just coincidentally, our flight took us way up north over Russia. And so we were able to get this picture of the world's largest lake. This is Lake Baikal, way up in northern Russia, and it's the world's largest lake because from this end to this end is 400 miles long, but more importantly, it's a mile deep because it's at the junction of 2 of the Earth's tectonic plates. 20% of all the fresh water on Earth is in that one lake. 1/5 of all Earth's fresh water is in Lake Baikal. So that's why we were there. We were there to get a picture of Lake Baikal. Well, we were only up 4.5 days because after the Challenger accident, we reviewed everything all over again, and we came to the realization that, you know, we thought we were real smart and we thought we knew a whole lot of things. There were a lot of things we did not know. And so we went into minimum duration flight for the first 4 missions after we started up again. So I was only up 4.5 days. So the philosophy was get it up there, get the mission accomplished, get it back down on the ground, and now let's go over it with a fine-tooth comb and check everything real carefully. Well, this is getting boring. Just a couple years later, I got to command the 2nd launch of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, and Endeavour was the shuttle that we built to replace Challenger. So I flew that, and this was a science mission. We had the Space Lab laboratory back in the cargo bay, so that was our major payload. And we had the first professional Japanese astronaut, Dr. Mamoru Mori, on our crew. Japan paid for this whole mission. And we had more than 40 material sciences and life sciences experiments back in the Space Lab. And what we're doing in this picture, I split my crew up into the red crew and the blue crew. So while the red crew was working, the blue crew was sleeping, and then every 12 hours we'd have a shift change, and that's what we're doing in this picture. You see the high-tech way that we hold ourselves in one position? These little foot loops. That's all you need, just one foot loop. Now you have both hands free to write with. And being weightless is so wonderful, because I'd finish a page in my notebook, I just park my pen right here, flip the page, grab the pen, and continue writing. Well, you get in the habit of doing that. And one of our flights came back from space, and an astronaut named Dale Gardner, there was a big crowd waiting for us when we would arrive back in Houston. Dale Gardner was signing an autograph book, and the nice lady said, "Hey, would you sign the next page too?" So he parked his pen, and he flipped the page, and where'd it go? So you get in the habit of doing that. That actually happened. So, but being weightless is really wonderful. And in fact, when you come back and land after even 4.5 days in space, you got to fly free as a bird the whole time you were up there. You didn't climb stairs. And we'd come back, and you'd stand up against gravity, and you'd say, "Oh, golly, this gravity stuff stinks." So anyway, you really enjoyed being weightless. Well, we came back. That was 8 days for that mission, and I landed at Cape Canaveral. So at this time, I've been a mission commander 3 times. And actually, I was kind of ahead of the rest of the pilots in my class. I guess the management liked me because I got to fly early and often. And one of the really great things about being in space is the view. You never get tired, and we would keep cameras by the overhead windows, which are the biggest windows on the shuttle. We would keep cameras right there because you'd be floating past someplace like this, the delta of the Nile River, and the camera had to be right there or else you were going to miss it, because we're going 5 miles per second is how fast we're going on orbit. So we captured this on my 4th mission, and from space, the only things that look gray or silver colored are cities. So right here at the tip of the delta, this is the capital of Egypt, Cairo. This is the Suez Canal, going from the Gulf of Suez into the Mediterranean Sea. And the bright spots in the sand right here, those are the pyramids. So if you know right where to look, you can actually pick out the pyramids from space. What do you suppose this looks like at night? It looks pretty spectacular at night. And you look at this picture and you go, holy smokes, there are sure a lot of people that are living along the Nile River. There's a lot of people in the delta of the Nile River as well. And that's because we humans very much need water. So where there's lots of water, there's lots of us. And where there's not lots of water, there's not many of us. I have no clue who this is out here. But you guys sure are out there on your own. The green glow on the horizon, that's our atmosphere. And at night it takes on some of the ambient lighting, and it's what we astronauts refer to as the air glow, because it's 80 miles thick. That's how thick our atmosphere is. And of course, that's what makes it possible for us to live here on the Earth. So this is kind of pretty, but this isn't the prettiest thing we see from space. I was talking to a bunch of 5th grade classes one time, and I said, okay, the next slide I'm going to show you is the prettiest thing we see from space. And one of the kids shouted out, Las Vegas. Well, it's kind of pretty, but it's not this pretty. The aurora. And you probably all know there are 2 auroras. There's the northern lights, which we're most familiar with because we're in the northern hemisphere, the aurora borealis. But there's also the southern lights. And these are each a ring of light around the North Pole and a ring of light around the South Pole. And it happens at the top of Earth's atmosphere. And we are actually above the top of Earth's atmosphere, so we look down at the aurora. And it's just fascinating to watch. It's hard to get a decent picture of, because again, you're going 5 miles a second, and the aurora won't hold still, and we can't hold still. So it's hard to get a decent photo of it. but it is just fascinating to watch it. Well, for my final mission, I trained over here. Where's this? Moscow. Yes, this is Red Square in Moscow. And the reason I trained in Russia was that I got selected to command the first docking ever done by a space shuttle, and it would be with the Russian Space Station Mir. My crew and I had to attempt to learn to speak Russian. Underline the word attempt, because I are an engineer, and engineers ain't taught good in English, let alone in Russian. And so trying to learn Russian was a real challenge for me. I'm good with math and physics and science, but languages, not quite so much. And so the Russian alphabet is all messed up. It's got 33 characters. They're Greek, Arabic, and Cyrillic. And characters in Russian alphabet aren't what they are in the American alphabet. So, for example, a capital H, as in Houston, that's not an H at all, that's an N. As in, never will I be able to learn Russian. But here's what I know best in Russian. Я говорю по-русски очень плохо и понимаю. And so anytime I needed to talk to somebody in Russian, I would start off by saying that, which is, I speak Russian very badly and understand nothing. Because I didn't want them to be expecting too much out of me. But when I launched, I had two cosmonauts on board, Anatoly Solovyev and Nikolai Budarin, who could not speak English. And at the time, Russia was so poor, they could not afford English teachers and English textbooks, so my crew and I had to make the effort to learn Russian. So here we are on the way to the Russian space station, and we needed to be able to talk to them in case I needed to tell them something like, Извините, пожалуйста, у нас есть маленький пожар на борту прямо сейчас. Excuse me, please, we have a small fire on board right now. So we needed to be able to talk to them. So here's my target. Well, no, not a target. Here's my place I'm going to dock. When it was them in a Russian MiG, then that was a target. But I'm going to dock to the upper right module. This is the Crystal module. And I'm going to fly the approach to there. And so when we got within about 4 miles, the mission commander, that's me, takes over manual control, and he flies the rest of the rendezvous and the docking by hand. So it's hand flown through the docking. I said, he takes over. Did we have any female mission commanders? Yes, we did. In fact, Eileen Collins was here yesterday, our first female shuttle commander. She just had to leave this morning. So I'm flying Atlantis by hand in this picture, and what I had to do, I had to manually fly Atlantis up, and my docking ring, which is about a 4-foot diameter ring up here in the forward part of the cargo bay, I had to fly that up and align it with the docking ring on the space station, and I had to line up the centers within 3 inches. So we're both going 17,500 miles an hour, and I've got 3 inches to play with on this. Now, we had done nearly 100 dockings in the simulator, and the more you practice, the easier it gets, and so it went just fine. And when we got there, the protocol was the 2 mission commanders are to shake hands at the hatch. So I had just opened the hatch from the shuttle, and I'm shaking hands in this photo with Russian Air Force Colonel Vladimir Dezhurov, who had been a Russian MiG pilot, training to shoot me down, all those years that I was training to shoot him down, and now I have to pretend like I like these godless communists. Well, we did get to like them. When we trained together for months before we actually went to space, and you come to find out they're just like us. They like flying jet fighters, they like pulling G's, they like going to space, they like going fast, they like everything about it. And so we did grow to like them. Well, we were docked with the Russian Space Station Mir for 5 days, and we had a lot of work to do. We had more than 400 items that we needed to transfer from the shuttle to the Mir, or from the Mir to the shuttle. So we were really busy. NASA blocks us out for a 16-hour workday and an 8-hour sleep period. We were not getting 8 hours of sleep because we would say goodnight to Houston and goodnight to Moscow, and put them to sleep on the ground, and then we'd continue working for another couple of hours just to get everything done. Well, it was time to undock, and this was a picture that I didn't point out the Soyuz capsule, but the two cosmonauts that I brought up to space with me took over the Russian space station, and I'm giving the three of them that have been there for 4 months a ride home. This is the only time we've ever done a Russian crew changeout with an American spacecraft. Anatoly and Nikolai climbed into the Soyuz and undocked. Soyuz was their spacecraft, moved out to the side 60 meters away, or about 200 feet, and took this photo of us getting ready to leave, and then this picture as we were leaving. So we separated away from the Mir, and we spent 2 more days in space getting ready to come back down and land at the end of a 10-day mission. And this is another same photo of a wind tunnel model of a space shuttle at Mach 25. And so I mentioned that this shock wave that shows up in the picture, this is the shock wave in the air. Temperature in that is 6,000 degrees. And what that looks like from inside is this. It looks like you're flying into a blowtorch. We heat the air up so hot that the molecules of nitrogen and the molecules of oxygen, which are N2 and O2, split up into N and N and O and O, and that forms an electrically charged cloud around us of plasma. I'm not sure if it's a positive charge or a negative charge, whichever one it is, but it looks like we're flying into a blowtorch. So it's pretty exciting coming down looking at that. And this was my first re-entry. This was a picture taken from Galveston Island, looking out over the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America? Gulf of Mexico, as we were coming back into land. And of course then, we're a glider. We're a 100-ton glider. So you get exactly 1.0 chances to land it. So we train very, very extensively. Once again, when we get down to about 50,000 feet on the way down, the commander, he or she, will take over manual control and fly the vehicle the rest of the way down to landing. There was never an automatic landing ever in the space shuttle. All 133 landings were flown manually by the commanders. And then if you've done everything right, you will have survived the mission, and you can pose for cool hero photos like this one. So this was my crew. There's only 4 of us because the 3 cosmonauts, we basically put them into wheelchairs when we get them back after 4 months up in space. Not basically, we do. We put them into wheelchairs. And one of my mission specialists, medical doctor Ellen Baker, was helping with the 3 cosmonauts. So that's why there's only 4 of us. So we launched with 7 and we came back with 8. So that hadn't happened before. Well, another adventure that I had was air racing. I had been fascinated by air racing and air racers and air race pilots all my life. And when I would be interviewed as an astronaut, I'd get asked, okay, you've been a jet fighter pilot, you've been a test pilot, you've been an astronaut. Is there something in the world of aviation you haven't done that you want to do? The answer was always yes. I would like to race the unlimited class at the Reno Air Races. So in 1998, I got asked by the owner of this airplane if I would race it for him in the Reno Air Races. He had bought it, hoping to race it himself, but his wife looked into the Reno Air Races and she said, that is too dangerous. You're not going to do that. So he thought about it for a little while and he said, okay, how about if I find somebody totally expendable, somebody that we could never possibly get attached to, and we'll have him race it for us. So that's where I came in. So they asked me if I would race the airplane for them. I think I said, okay, how much do I need to pay you? I've been hoping to do this all my life because this is an airplane that now has 3,000 horsepower and would do 450 miles an hour around the race course. So here's how we would race. We would line up on a pace plane, kind of like the Indy 500, you have a pace car. We'd line up on a pace plane, and you can see it at the far right side of the picture. In order to be fast enough, it's a jet. It's a T-33 jet. And he points us at the race course, and about 2 miles before the first pylon, he makes the famous call, "Gentlemen, you look good. Gentlemen, you have a race." And he's not crazy. He's not going down there. He pitches up and leaves, and all the rest of us are heading for that first pylon. And fortunately, in the unlimited class, there's a wide range of speeds, so the airplanes do tend to space out. But you do wind up with some real beak-to-beak air racing. And in this picture, I'm breathing real heavily down this P-51 Mustang flown by a dear friend of mine named Jimmy. And we have just finished the one kind of not real long straightaway. So he and I are doing about 450 miles an hour in this picture. The rule for minimum altitude is my helmet must not be below the top of this pylon. I see that as a reasonable rule. The top of that pylon is 30 feet off the ground. So I only got called for low flying one time in all the years that I raced. So that was racing a Hawker Sea Fury. I raced Reno altogether 18 years. And it's not the most sane thing in the world to be doing, because 8 of those years we lost a pilot. And one of those years we lost 3 pilots. So I still can't believe my wife let me do that. But, you know, if you've got to replace a rocket for excitement, it's going to have to be something like this. This is what I flew the last year that I raced, which was 2015. It's a highly modified P-51 Mustang that normally had 1,900 horsepower. The engine is souped up to where it was putting out 3,000 horsepower. This is a Rolls-Royce Merlin V12. And I did the first lap in the championship race at 503 miles an hour. And again, this is that pylon, the top of which is 30 feet off the ground, so I'm, 50 feet? Going 500 miles an hour. So again, you know, if you got to replace a rocket ship, it's got to be something like this. So I won the Unlimited Championship, and this is the hero photo of me holding the permanent trophy. And after that year, the owner of the airplane, I called him 2 months later. He was really excited the day after we won, because I won him a lot of money. And I didn't take any of the prize money. I was doing it for the fun of it. And I called him 2 months after we won, and I said, "We're going racing again next year, right?" And he said, "Hooter, I'm too old and you're too old. I'm going to have a younger pilot from now on." Well, I hold the speed record for the race course, but I'm too old. But okay, it's his airplane. I guess he can do with it as he chooses. So that was my last year, but I guess I went out on top with the Unlimited Championship after 18 years of flying in the air races. So that was very exciting. Okay, I'm just going to finish up with where we stand right now with space. Let's hear it for SpaceX. All right, SpaceX. This is the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket launching. And all those years that we've been supporting the International Space Station, after we retired the Space Shuttle, we didn't have a way to get our astronauts to the International Space Station. So the Russians, since they're our good, close buddies, were flying our astronauts up there for only $73 million a person. We were paying them $73 million for each one of our astronauts that they carried up there for us. And of course, they have the Crew Dragon vehicle, which autonomously flies the launcher up into orbit, separates, does the rendezvous on the space station, and autonomously does the docking with the International Space Station. So it really is wonderful. Once in a while, we carry one of the Russians, and I hope we're charging them $73 million for taking them to the International Space Station. But here's where we're headed in the future. The Space Launch System, the SLS, the Artemis program, the world's biggest successful rocket, was built from space shuttle components. It uses a bigger fuel tank, the big orange tank. It uses 5 segments of the solid rocket boosters on each side. So it has a lift capability of 8 million pounds. And we launched it in November of 2023, unmanned for the first time. And it went here. So the Orion crew module flew to the moon and circled the moon for about a week, and it actually went beyond the moon. It went quite a ways beyond the moon. This is the farthest from Earth any human-capable vehicle has ever gone, was, again, the Orion crew module in the Artemis program. The next launch will have 4 astronauts on board, and they'll be going back to the moon. They're not going to set foot on the moon because we don't have the lander yet. But the next launch, Artemis 2, is the launch coming up. Artemis 3, the plan is that we will once again have astronauts walk on the moon. So that's probably the next year, probably 2026. So that's where our space program is headed. Now, you probably know that I have a book. I published a children's book, and I had a lot of help with it, and there were 2 women that helped me with it, Zarina Salido and Michelle Rush, who's an artist as well as a writer. The 3 of us got together to write a book about a young owl, a little owlet named Andrew, whose grandfather Hoot takes him flying. And so this is a picture of my grandson Andrew, and I take him flying in my airplane, which is a Beechcraft Bonanza, and he loves 0 Gs. He loves weightlessness. In fact, we'll be just lifting off, and I'm starting to retract the landing gear, and he'll say, "Can we do 0 Gs?" And I'll say, "Andrew, we're going to, but we need some altitude first. We got to get away from the ground." And he loves 0 Gs. Well, the 2 ladies involved were the ones that said, let's make that a children's book. And we named it First Flight, and it's a story about grandfather Hoot, who takes his grandson Andrew flying. And the publisher cornered me after we finished this book. And the book took us all of last year to get the book written, get all the artwork together, and put it together. We just released the book the end of October, first part of November last year. And the publisher started harassing me. He said, "Okay, you've written a children's book. When are you going to write your book?" And I said, Tony, another astronaut wants to tell us his life story. That's what's slowing me down. He said, "You have a unique story with all the different facets of aviation that I've been involved in." And I had to admit, I said, "Okay, you're right, I probably do. And if I want to do it for any other reason than for my kids and my grandkids, that's enough reason to be doing it." So that's the book in the middle. We were talking on the phone one day, and he was saying, "What are we going to call this book?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. My journey from combat pilot in Vietnam to 5 space missions. Well, gee, 5 space missions, that makes me a space ace, doesn't it?" And he said, "That's it, space ace." Because an ace in jet fighters was a fighter pilot that had 5 shoot downs, 5 MiGs, for example. So anyway, the book's going to be Space Ace. Well, it turns out that in January, here's what it looks like. Here's one of the images. This is little Andrew riding on his grandfather Hoot's back, going flying. And I won't tell you the whole story of the book, but at the end of the book, Andrew was able to fly by himself. And I started to say in January, the book was given this award. Children's Press magazine gave us the 2025 Book of the Year award for it after it had only been out for about a month. And then just last week, we were notified that we've been given this award for it as well. And so it has just been, it's been a lot of fun. I wasn't doing the book because I wanted to sell them and make money. I did the book because I wanted to kind of memorialize my grandson Andrew. He and I have done a book signing down in Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama, which is just a 2-hour drive from my house. And he was a star. He and I both wore our blue NASA flight suits for it. And he sat right at the table with me, and he was autographing the books as I was autographing them too. And he's been a little bit of a shy kid. He really came out of his shell because people were asking him, "What's it like to be a star?" And he was answering very matter-of-factly and say, "Well, yes, it's been a lot of fun." And he really came out of his shell. and that was a lot of fun for me to actually see him come out of his shell. So that's the story that I had to tell us. Thank you so very much for all your attention. Thanks for inviting me here.